something that seems to be eternal is the Republican desire to suppress the vote and do it by apparently any means necessary. We know there have basically been two major, it seems to me, broad, I don't know if these would be tactical or strategic goals, but one is to lock in Republican gains in the House through redistricting by taking over the state legislatures, which they have largely done, simultaneously also creating other barriers to the exercise, I guess, partial, it seems to me, right to vote in this country. And obviously, again, all this is focused on certain demographics, certain types of people who we know tend to vote for Democrats. Where are we at on both those accords?
Sure. Well, I mean, with redistricting, Republicans have been quite successful in locking in their gains from 2010 in the House and in the State House. So I think, is basically done for the next decade. They won
for
after,
the next decade. People should understand.
They won in 2010. They got to draw the maps as a result of the census. And those maps are in effect for the next decade. They've been challenged in some places. They've been blocked, for example, in Texas for discriminating against minority voters. But in most states, they have gone through. And so that's a huge consequential change that no one talks about. That's on the first thing. The second thing is that when it comes to these voter suppression laws, whether it's making it harder to register to vote or cutting back on early voting or demanding government-issued IDs to cast a ballot, there's been a very large pushback against these laws in the courts, and that's what I just wrote about this week for The Nation when I had this blog called Courts Block GOP Voter Suppression Laws, and I have some good maps from the Brennan Center for Justice illustrating this point. But basically what we saw in 2011 is states controlled by Republicans did everything they could to restrict the right to vote, primarily for young, minority, and low-income voters who are really one of the major cores of the Obama coalition. What's happened in 2012 is that these laws have been challenged in court and have been almost universally blocked. And the latest case was in Pennsylvania, where the judge kind of copped out. He refused to block the law in full, but he basically said that the voter ID law in Pennsylvania will not be in effect for the 2012 election. It is not mandatory to show this government-issued form of ID that the state now requires, which is, I think, a very important development. And the larger story here is that Pennsylvania is one of 11 states where a voter suppression law that was passed since 2010 has been blocked by the courts.
Okay,
and so that's a pretty remarkable pushback.
So we have 11 states where these where the courts have pushed
11
back.
laws. 11 laws.
Okay.
Yeah.
So but in terms of Pennsylvania, he's not saying there's a problem with the law. He's saying that there's a problem with a sufficient time to implement the law properly, and so essentially this goes into effect the day after the election.
Well, there's going to be a trial after the election to determine whether the law will stand. I think there's a good chance that there will be a voter ID law in Pennsylvania, but it's not guaranteed. But it's not in effect in this election. I think the plaintiffs in the voter ID case, which included the ACLU of Pennsylvania and the Advancement Project, I think they made a tactical decision that because they were dealing with a Republican judge and in the lower courts and a Republican Supreme Court that was tied 3-3 between Republicans and Democrats, but because you need a 4-2 court to actually overturn a law, you're basically dealing with a Republican court. They made a tactical decision that they couldn't argue about the constitutionality of voter ID laws so much as they had to just argue that not everyone was going to have ID, and therefore people were going to be disenfranchised. And I think they were largely successful. I mean, they did convince these Republican judges that people would be disenfranchised. Now, after the election, they will be able to argue about the constitutionality of voter ID laws. But first, they just needed this law to not be in effect for the 2012 election. So it was a major tactical victory. They may end up losing the larger war, but I think for these purposes, given the court we had in Pennsylvania, which was not a very favorable one, it was a relatively good decision.
Can this stay, essentially? I guess I'm not exactly sure if it's if the law is being enjoined or it's a stay or whatever it is. can this be appealed? In other words, can Pennsylvania go back to court this week and say, no, here's proof that we can implement it properly?
I don't see any indication that the state is going to appeal, and I don't think the state Supreme Court of Pennsylvania would be very amenable to an appeal, because the state Supreme Court seemed very skeptical that everyone would be able to get the ID they need. I mean, there's just a simple problem, as Bill Clinton would say, of arithmetic here, because the judge in the lower court who initially upheld the law said that somewhere between 1% and 9% of registered voters in Pennsylvania don't have that ID. That's anywhere from 100,000 to 500,000 people, according to conservative estimates. But only 13,000 people have gotten the new voter ID needed. So, I mean, that leaves a gap of anywhere from 90,000 to upwards of 400,000 people who are registered voters who don't have the correct ID. And I think it was for that reason that the Supreme Court and then subsequently the lower court couldn't say that no voters would be disenfranchised, because the simple math wasn't on the state of Pennsylvania's side.
And how do you get that voter ID? Do you have to go in and prove that you believe in the American dream or something like that? Is that one of the requirements?
You have to state that you believe in the Second Amendment. No, I mean, basically...
They take a measure of how big your flag lapel pin is, and that's the way...
The problem in Pennsylvania was that you had to get the ID from a Pennsylvania Department of Transportation office, and 9 counties in Pennsylvania didn't even have one of those offices. In 20 other counties, it was only open 1 day a week. In Philadelphia, there was 5 Department of Transportation offices for a city with over 1 million people. And so it was a situation where people would show up at these offices and they'd wait 2 or 3 or 4 hours, and then they were told sometimes, you don't even have the right documents you need to be able to get this ID, and so people would leave, they would have to come back, then they would tell them they needed some documents that the people didn't have, you need a birth certificate or a social security card when you didn't, and so there was just an incredible amount of confusion, and so the system was not set up to handle the ability of people to get IDs, I think largely because this was not a good faith effort from Pennsylvania to make sure that everyone would get ID. This was an attempt by Pennsylvania Republicans to essentially create and manufacture an electorate that would be more in their favor by preventing a lot of young voters, minority voters, and low-income voters from being able to cast a ballot.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, when I moved, I had a Massachusetts license for forever, and I don't know, 5 or 6, 7 years ago when we moved upstate, I was supposed to, well, I thought that I didn't have to. I subsequently found out that I was supposed to have switched it within 30 days. But at one point, it came around time, must have been, 5 or 6 years ago, I guess. I was going to try and get a New York State license. And I had to go down there like 12 times because I kept getting the documents wrong. I mean, I'm not a total idiot, but I think... I
don't know is that a reflection on the law or just a reflection on you?
I think it's a reflection on both. I think literally 2 times, maybe it's a reflection on the law. Maybe the 5 times like it took me, a reflection on me. But, I wasn't having to drive hours and hours. I had a vehicle. I had days where I could take off. I mean, whatever it was. And so it's not hard to see if you're being reasonable about how difficult this is, and what kind of. So let me ask you this. All right. We have a Supreme Court session that is now just started, I think 2 days ago, where the Voting Rights Act appears to be coming up in I guess, potential cases in which specifically the pre-clearance of certain states having to go to the Department of Justice before they can implement laws that in some way significantly could infringe upon people's ability to vote is maybe up before the Supreme Court. How many of those instances took place this year, and what do you think the implications of all these court cases, which essentially have said everything that we're looking at infringes upon people's rights, makes a what they call a prima facie argument, on its face argument, first blush argument, that we still need the Voting Rights Act because there are still people out there trying to disenfranchise largely minority voters?
Yeah. So what Republicans are challenging is Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which includes parts or all of 16 states, mostly in the South, who had a history of racial discrimination in voting in 1964, and many of those states still have a very shameful record when it comes to restricting the right to vote today, given that 8 of 11 states in the former Confederacy have passed new voting restrictions since 2010. So I think in many cases, past is present in the South right now. And they're trying to say that Section 5 is unconstitutional. The problem is that states like Texas have come before either the Justice Department or the federal courts, because they have one of two options, and they've come before the federal courts, and they've asked for their laws to be pre-cleared, and the federal courts have said, these laws are discriminatory. We are not going to pre-clear them. And that includes, if you look at the Texas redistricting case and the Texas voter ID case, both of which were blocked by federal courts, that includes Republican judges who have said that these laws are discriminatory. So I believe that should influence the Supreme Court justices. I think if the justices are looking at, is Section 5 still relevant, the best example of it is this past year, because it's never been more relevant if states like Florida and Texas and South Carolina are coming before federal courts and having to prove that their laws are not discriminatory, and they're losing these cases. Texas lost 2 big voting rights cases under Section 5. Florida lost a case about early voting under Section 5. The justices found that early voting restrictions in Florida were discriminatory against minority voters. I think there's a very good chance South Carolina is going to lose its case as well. So this evidence should influence the Supreme Court, because Section 5 is a very important tool, and states are still passing voter suppression laws. They passed more voter suppression laws since the 2010 election than they had since the Jim Crow era. And so I believe that this challenge to Section 5 is critically important, and if the Supreme Court was to gut Section 5 or to overturn it altogether, it would really be an absolutely horrible day for voting rights. I hope it doesn't come to that, though. There's a good chance that this case is going to be heard not this fall and this spring, though, so I think there's some time to work all of this out.
Is there has there been any Section 5 cases that have ruled in favor of the state?
There have been cases where the Department of Justice has pre-cleared laws.
Well,
that have not
but
been,
that, so, yeah, okay.
But there has not been a case before federal court where Republicans have won under Section 5, no. There's been 3 challenges thus far that have been ruled on under Section 5 by the federal courts, 2 in Texas, 1 in Florida, and Republicans have lost all of those cases.
So the only real challenge that somebody could bring, it seems to me, to the Supreme Court would be based upon the constitutionality of it, right? I mean, because you can't talk about the efficacy of it or that there's been any harm done per se, because you can't argue that the courts have been somehow harmed us, right? I mean,
no, that's what they're arguing. They are arguing about the constitutionality of it. There is a case in Alabama. What Alabama did is there was a small county, Shelby County, Alabama. They had one black city commissioner, and he represented a district that was largely African American. They redrew those lines without federal approval. Alabama is subject to Section 5. They redrew those lines without federal approval, and they reduced his district from a 70% minority voting district to a 22% minority voting district. And that African American city council member was subsequently defeated in his new nearly all-white district. And the Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act says very clearly you can't pass a voting change that makes it harder for minority citizens to either cast a ballot or to elect their candidate of choice. And when you reduce a district from 70% to 22% African American, that is clearly what you are doing. And so the Department of Justice not only said we refuse to clear this, but they said you're in violation of Section 5. That case has been challenged. Now it's been challenged in the lower courts, both in district court and the Court of Appeals. Alabama has lost both of those cases, but they're nonetheless now appealing to the Supreme Court, and attorney generals in 6 Republican states are supporting this. This, to me, seems like a slam dunk case. Alabama should absolutely lose this case, but you never know what the 5 conservative justices in the court are going to do.
Are we going to see people go to sleep again after this? I mean, it seems to me that after 2000, I thought we would see a lot more activity in terms of making sure that our laws to vote, making sure that people weren't accidentally purged, making sure would have been corrected, right? I mean, I think I seem to remember that you have written specifically that you can forget the recounts, you can forget Ralph Nader, you can forget anything you want to forget in Florida if you remember that there were some 15,000 people scrubbed from the rolls who tried to vote, who couldn't vote, specifically inappropriately, and there's every reason to believe from their demographic breakdown that they would have certainly more than made up the hundreds of votes that Al Gore lost by.
Well, absolutely. There was 12,000 registered voters who were wrongly labeled as felons in Florida and prevented from voting. 41% of them were African Americans. Well, African Americans supported Al Gore over George Bush by 80-something points. And so it's not hard to imagine that even if a fraction of those purged voters had been able to cast a ballot, that would have been enough to make up the margin that George W. Bush had over Al Gore, those 537 votes. So, I mean, you can even take the Supreme Court out of it and say that Al Gore should have won the election, and that voter purge cost him the election. So the idea that Florida would attempt a voter purge like this again in 2012 is really shocking to me, and luckily it's largely been stalled, and the local election supervisors have refused to implement it. But it's nonetheless disturbing that Florida would not only do that, but take a series of other steps to restrict the right to vote, including cutting back on voter registration drives, cutting back on early voting, and disenfranchising ex-felons. I do think that I was just talking to a big voting rights activist this morning about this, and she told me there's been a rejuvenation of the voting rights movement because of all these voter suppression laws that have been passed, and that's one benefit of all these laws passed, is that people are more aware of this. But I totally agree with you that if Obama wins the election, that doesn't certainly make all these laws right. And it doesn't certainly mean that we just have to go to sleep in 2013. I think we should fully expect that Republicans in states that have Republican legislatures and Republican governors are going to try to pass these laws in 2013 and 2014. They might be a little more careful about the laws. They might be a little looser in implementing them so as to avoid court challenges. But I think we have to remain as vigilant after the election as we've been in the last year or two.